The overlooked queen. The great hall smelled of pine smoke and dominance, the kind that made my wolf retreat into the corners of my mind. Every unmated wolf in the territories had been summoned. When the Lycan king calls, you don't decline. I stood near the back wall, fingers twisted in my dress, watching with the sick fascination of someone watching storm clouds before a hurricane. My worn boots were freshly polished, trying to look like I belonged among these daughters of alphas, girls who moved like they owned the air they breathed. "Stand straight," my sister Natalia had hissed before we entered. "For once, don't make us look weak." Weak. The word had followed me since childhood, since my wolf first emerged. Small, silver-furred, with eyes too large and a howl too soft. Not like Natalia's wolf. All golden power and alpha blood. I watched the king from across the room, and my breath caught. He stood on the raised dais, massive and dark-haired, with features carved from granite and eyes that could strip flesh with a glance. Kieran Blackwater. The name alone made wolves across 3 territories drop their gazes. He'd taken the throne at 20 after his father's death, and in 8 years since, he'd crushed rebellions, conquered rival packs, and remained utterly alone. No queen, no mate, no weakness. "They say he killed the last woman who tried to claim him," someone whispered nearby. Some said he was cursed. Others said he simply had standards no she-wolf could meet. A few whispered darker things, that he'd loved once, and that love destroyed him so completely he'd rather rule alone than risk it again. His gaze swept the room with predatory precision, and my heart hammered so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. "The king will speak with each of you individually," announced his beta, Rowan, a scarred wolf whose reputation for brutality preceded him. "When your name is called, you will approach. You will not waste his time." One by one they were called. One by one dismissed in seconds. Elena Winters. My name. I couldn't move. My legs had turned to stone. Natalia's elbow connected with my ribs, and I stumbled forward on numb feet. The crowd parted, and suddenly there was nothing between me and the dais except 30 feet of marble and my thundering pulse. Up close, the king was even more terrifying. He towered over me, all coiled strength barely contained by his formal black jacket. His hair was dark as midnight, pushed back from a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't so severe. But it was his eyes that held me. Pale silver like ice on a frozen lake. Deep and dangerous. "Name," he said, though he obviously knew it. "Elena Winters, Your Majesty." My voice came out steadier than expected. "Pack?" "Thornwood, Your Majesty." "Rank?" I hesitated. This was where it always fell apart. "My father is the pack's lead healer. I assist him." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Not quite amusement, but close. "You're unmated." "Yes, Your Majesty." "Why?" The bluntness startled me. This was the question that had haunted me for years, the one my pack asked with their silences. "I don't know, Your Majesty." He studied me, and I fought the urge to drop my gaze. "Do you have a mate?" Something strange entered his voice. "Someone waiting for you?" The question seemed different somehow. He wasn't asking if I was mated. He was asking if I belonged to someone, even without the bond sealed. "Not yet," I whispered. The change was instantaneous. His entire body went rigid. The temperature dropped. The silver eyes that had been merely intimidating now blazed with something wild and barely controlled. "Not yet," he repeated, voice dropping to a growl that vibrated through my bones. "Explain." I blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "I only meant I'm not promised to anyone, Your Majesty. No arrangement. I'm unmated, and free." "Free," he said, testing the word. His jaw clenched so tight I could see muscle jumping. "You consider yourself free?" Yes." He leaned forward. I caught his scent, pine and snow, something darker, like smoke from a fire burned too long. And if someone were to claim you, if someone were to decide you belong to them, would you still consider yourself free? My heart raced differently now. There was challenge in his words. Beneath that, something that almost sounded like jealousy. I would belong to my mate, I said carefully. When the bond chooses, the bond. He cut me off with a laugh that held no humor. Tell me, Elena Winters, do you believe the bond is always right? That fate knows better than we do? It felt like a test. I believe, I said slowly, that the bond can surprise us. That sometimes strength isn't what we expect it to be. For the first time, his expression shifted. The rage, or whatever that fierce emotion was, didn't disappear, but changed into something else. Something like recognition. Step back, he said quietly. I obeyed, retreating as protocol demanded. As I turned, I heard him speak so softly, I almost thought I'd imagined it. Not yet, she said. Not yet. The dismissal should have been relief. Instead, I felt his gaze follow me across the marble like a physical touch. What did you say to him? Natalia grabbed my arm, nails digging through fabric. He looked at you like I've never seen him look at anyone like that. I don't know what you mean. The lie tasted bitter. I knew exactly what she meant. You did something, she insisted. If you've insulted him. I answered his questions, that's all. But it wasn't like everyone else, and we both knew it. The procession continued. More names, more dismissals. But now there was tension in the air, a charge like lightning about to strike. When the last name was called, Beta Rowan stepped forward. The king will make his decision by nightfall. All unmated females will remain in the palace. The crowd began to disperse. I tried to slip away quietly when a hand caught my wrist. A palace guard. Elena Winters. The king requests your presence in the East Library. Immediately. The whispers around us cut off. Natalia's face went pale, then flushed with rage. There must be some mistake, I managed. No mistake. Follow me. The East Library stretched toward a vaulted ceiling painted with constellations. The scent of old leather and parchment filled the air, and standing by the window was the king. He'd removed his formal jacket. Now he wore only a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with scars and ancient pack symbols. He didn't turn when I entered. The door clicked shut behind me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Do you know why I called this gathering? His voice was quieter now. To find a queen. To find a mate, he corrected, finally turning. There's a difference. I waited. A queen is a title, a political alliance. He moved closer with predatory grace. A mate is something else entirely. Something I've been told I'll never have. Your Majesty. Not yet, he interrupted. You said not yet when I asked if you had a mate, as if it's inevitable, as if you're simply waiting. I swallowed hard. Isn't that what we all hope for? Hope? He laughed bitterly. I stopped hoping 8 years ago, Elena. I stopped believing in bonds and fate and all the pretty lies we tell ourselves. There was a story there, a wound that hadn't healed. Then why hold a gathering? I dared to ask. Because a king needs an heir. Because my council demands it. His jaw tightened. Because apparently ruling 3 territories isn't enough, I also need to produce the next generation to satisfy old traditions. The cynicism should have repelled me. Instead, I heard the loneliness underneath. That's not a good reason to choose someone. His eyes snapped to mine. No? Then tell me, what would be a good reason? The question hung between us, dangerous and intimate. Choosing someone who sees you, I whispered. Not your title or power. Just you. Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the armor. He moved closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back. Close enough that his scent wrapped around me. And do you see me, little wolf? His voice rumbled through my bones. "When you look at me, what do you see?" I should have said, "My king." Should have dropped my gaze and murmured something safe. Instead, truth spilled out. "I see someone who's tired of being alone, but doesn't know how to let anyone close. Someone who's built walls so high he's forgotten what it feels like to be touched without flinching." I paused, then finished quietly. "Someone who's afraid. Just like me." The silence was absolute. I'd crossed a line. You don't tell the Lycan king he's afraid. I waited for his anger. Instead, he reached out slowly and caught a strand of my pale hair. He rubbed it between his fingers, expression distant. "My mate," he said finally, "died 3 weeks before our bonding ceremony. Murdered by wolves who thought I was too young to rule." My breath caught. "They succeeded," he continued, voice empty now. "Not in taking my throne, but in breaking something inside me. I hunted down every wolf involved, built my reputation on their deaths, and when it was done, I realized I'd eliminated any chance of feeling that way again." "I'm sorry," I whispered. He let my hair slip through his fingers. "Don't be. It made me stronger. Made me the kind of king these territories need." "Is that really strength?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Or is it just safer?" His eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I thought I'd pushed too far. Then, incredibly, his mouth curved. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," I admitted. This time he did smile, barely. Just a quirk at the corner of his mouth, but it transformed his face. "The bond didn't choose me," he said abruptly. "When she died, I felt it snap. Felt the potential just dissolve. I've spent 8 years certain it would never happen again." "But," I prompted. He stepped back, creating distance. "But when you stood before me, when you said not yet with such certainty." He shook his head. "Something in me wanted to destroy whoever you're waiting for. Wanted to prove you were wrong to sound so sure." The confession was raw. "I'm not waiting for anyone specific," I said carefully. "I just believe the bond will find me someday." "Such faith," he murmured. "I remember having that." We stood in golden afternoon light, 2 wolves who'd learned loneliness in different ways. "Why did you really summon me here?" I asked. He turned back to the window. "Because when I looked at you, I felt something I haven't felt in 8 years, and I needed to know if it was real or just wishful thinking." My heart hammered. "Is it real?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I want to find out. That for the first time since her death, I'm curious about something other than survival." He looked at me over his shoulder, vulnerability stealing my breath. "Stay," he said. Not a command, a request. "Let me understand what it is about you that makes me feel less cold." As I stood there with the Lycan king looking at me like I was something precious and terrifying, I realized my answer had been decided the moment our eyes first met. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll stay." 3 weeks later. The days existed in strange, suspended reality. The other unmated females had been dismissed. I'd watched them depart, Natalia's furious glare burning into me even from the courtyard. She hadn't spoken to me since. But here in the palace, I wasn't the disappointing daughter. I was simply Elena. And Kieran seemed determined to understand exactly who that was. He didn't court me traditionally. No formal dinners or chaperoned walks. Instead, he invited me to places that felt sacred. The library, where we'd sit in companionable silence, or his study where he'd ask my opinion on pact disputes. "You think too much about what others need," he observed one evening. "Don't you ever consider what you want?" "I suppose I've never had the luxury." His expression darkened. "You speak as if you're disposable." To them, I was. My wolf is small. I'm not a fighter. The only value I had was helping my father with healing work. Kieran leaned forward. "What value do you think you have now?" Another test, but I was learning his tests were about understanding how I thought. I think value isn't something someone else assigns to you, I said slowly. Maybe it's something you decide for yourself. He'd smiled then and reached across the table to brush my hand. The touch sent warmth racing through my veins. The palace staff noticed, of course. Beta Rowan was worst, his scarred face twisting with disgust whenever we crossed paths. He doesn't trust easily, Kieran explained. He watched me hunt down her murderers, watched me become harder. To him, anyone who threatens to soften those edges is dangerous. And am I asked. Dangerous to you? He'd looked at me for a long moment, terrifyingly so. But it was Rowan's mate, Lydia, who became my unexpected ally. She'd found me in the gardens 3 days after the others left, a small woman with auburn hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her pregnancy was obvious now. You're wondering why he chose you, she said without preamble, settling beside me. Rowan thinks you're manipulating him. I told him he's an idiot. Despite myself, I smiled. And what do you think? I think Kieran sees something in you that reminds him of who he was before the darkness. She turned those keen eyes on me. I also think you're more terrified than anyone realizes. The accuracy stole my breath. He's been alone so long, Lydia continued quietly. We've watched him become colder, harder, and then you walked in and something woke up. It scared him. It scared all of us. I'm not trying to trap him. Stop, she interrupted firmly. Whatever you think you're lacking, he doesn't see it that way. He looks at you like you're water, and he's been dying of thirst. A week later, the council requested a formal audience. Kieran asked me to attend. They need to see you're not just temporary, he'd explained, though tension in his jaw suggested he wasn't looking forward to it. The council chamber was all dark wood and heavy judgment. 7 wolves sat there, alphas from the most powerful packs, each radiating authority. I took my place slightly behind Kieran's chair, trying to project confidence while my wolf cowered. Your Majesty, began Counselor Marcus, a grizzled alpha with scars. Questions must be asked. This girl from Thornwood, what are your intentions? My intentions are my own business. With respect, they are the business of these territories. Another counselor, a woman named Helena, leaned forward. You called a gathering to find a queen. Every unmated female of standing answered. Then, you dismissed them for a healer's daughter with no rank, no connections, no strength we can discern. The words were meant to wound. They succeeded. But then Kieran stood, and the temperature dropped. Be very careful, he said softly, dangerously. How you speak about her in my presence. The council exchanged glances. We mean no disrespect, Marcus said carefully. But the territories need stability. She's not a girl, I interrupted, surprising myself. 7 pairs of eyes turned to me. I'm a wolf. Maybe not the strongest or fastest, but I'm not a child to be discussed while standing right here. You overstep, Marcus growled, his alpha aura pressing against me. I forced myself not to flinch. Perhaps. But if you're going to judge whether I belong here, at least have the courtesy to speak to me, not about me. Kieran remained still, but I felt something shift in the air, a subtle change suggesting he was poised to intervene. Fine, Helena said, eyes assessing. Tell us what you bring to this alliance. What value do you offer our king? The question I'd been asking myself since day 1, but standing there with Kieran's presence solid behind me, I finally understood. I see him, I said simply. Not the king, not the legend. I see a wolf who's been alone so long, he's forgotten what it feels like to be known. Maybe I'm not a strategic alliance or political victory, but I'd rather be someone who sees the truth than someone who only sees the crown. The council exchanged more glances. My words hadn't satisfied them, but Kieran placed his hand on my shoulder, a public claim of protection that sent murmurs around the table. Your concerns are noted, he said with quiet finality. Dismissed. Later, in his study, he pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair. You stood up to them, he murmured. They could have crushed you, and you stood your ground. I was terrified. I know. I could sense your fear. He pulled back to look at me, eyes blazing. But you did it anyway. That's courage, Elena. Then he kissed me. Not gentle or tentative, but desperate and claiming, like he was trying to pour 8 years of loneliness into that single connection. I responded without thinking, rising on my toes, fingers tangling in his hair. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. I don't know if this is the bond, he whispered. But Elena, when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something beyond duty. I feel it too, I confessed, like I've been waiting without knowing what I was waiting for. Now you know, he finished. The shift. The shift happened gradually, like winter melting into spring. Kieran began including me in more than meetings. He took me to training grounds, introduced me to patrol leaders, showed me the intricate network holding 3 territories together. The warriors were skeptical at first, but I'd never demanded respect I hadn't earned. Instead, I asked questions, learned their names, their stories. When a young warrior dislocated his shoulder during training, I stepped forward instinctively. The bone slid back with a sickening pop. I wrapped it properly, explaining care instructions. You've got steady hands, the warrior, a wolf named Finn with copper hair, said with genuine admiration. Word spread. When patrols returned with wounded wolves, they started asking for me specifically. Not because I was the king's, whatever I was to him, because I was good at what I did. Even Rowan slowly began to thaw. He'd sought me out one evening when Kieran was locked in a meeting. The king is different with you, he'd said without preamble. Softer. More like he was before. Before he lost her, I finished quietly. Rowan nodded. I've served him 8 years, watched him become harder than diamond. But I've seen him laugh twice in the past 2 weeks, Elena. In 8 years before you, I never heard him laugh once. His eyes met mine, fierce and assessing. Don't make me regret accepting you. I won't, I'd promised. The bond. 3 weeks after I'd arrived, Kieran asked me to accompany him to the northern border. Reports of rogues testing territory lines, not a major threat, but he wanted to make his presence known. Lydia had helped me prepare, lending riding clothes. You'll do fine, she'd assured me. Just remember, northern pack wolves are traditional. They might test you. The journey took most of the day. Kieran had pointed out landmarks, telling stories about battles fought and treaties signed, his voice losing its formal edge. I used to come here as a boy, he'd said when we stopped to water horses at a stream. Before my father died, I'd slip away and run these woods in wolf form for hours, just feeling free. Do you ever do that anymore? I'd asked. Just run for joy? He'd been quiet. No. I stopped allowing myself that freedom. It felt irresponsible. Or maybe it's what keeps you sane, I'd said. Maybe that's what you've been missing. Someone who reminds you you're allowed to be more than just a king. His expression shifted. Is that what you think you're doing? I think we remind each other, I'd said carefully, that maybe we both needed someone who could see past expectations. He'd closed the distance then, cupping my face with tenderness that still surprised me. I don't deserve you. You don't get to decide that, I'd whispered back. I do. The kiss had been interrupted by Rowan clearing his throat, reminding us we had an audience. But Kieran's hand found mine and didn't let go for the rest of the ride. The northern pack's alpha, a massive wolf named Garrett with gray-streaked beard and flint eyes, had greeted us with formal respect bordering on suspicion. Your Majesty, he'd rumbled, gaze sliding to me. We weren't told you'd be bringing a guest. Elena is under my personal protection, Kieran had replied, steel underneath. She goes where I go. The meeting had been tense, but productive. But it was what happened after that changed everything. A child had approached me, a little girl no more than 6 with tangled brown hair and enormous eyes. She'd been limping. When I'd knelt to her level, she'd whispered, "It hurts." "May I look?" When she nodded, I examined the leg carefully. A sprain. Not serious, but painful. I'd wrapped it with supplies from my pack, showing her mother care instructions. "Thank you," the mother had said, tears welling. "Our healer passed last winter." "I can leave you with herbs," I'd offered, "and instructions for basic treatments." Garrett had interrupted. "You're trained in healing?" "My father taught me. I've been assisting him since I was old enough to hold a poultice." Something shifted in the pack's demeanor after that. More wolves approached with questions about wounds, about herbs, about whether symptoms warranted concern. I'd answered what I could, made notes about supplies I could send from the palace. When we'd finally prepared to leave, Garrett had pulled Kieran aside. I'd been too far to hear, but I'd seen the older alpha's expression soften. On the ride back, with darkness falling and stars emerging, Kieran had been unusually quiet. "You're thinking too loud," I'd finally said. He'd smiled slightly. "Garrett told me something interesting. He said in all the years he's known me, he's never seen me look at anyone the way I look at you. He said it was like watching someone remember how to be alive." My breath caught. "And what did you say?" "That he was right." Kieran reached across, taking my hand. "Every moment with you, Elena, I feel pieces of myself coming back. Pieces I thought were lost forever." He'd stopped abruptly. "Someone you love," I'd finished softly. The silence stretched, heavy with what we were both feeling but hadn't named. Finally, he'd spoken, voice rough. "I don't know if I'm capable of that anymore. I've spent 8 years teaching myself not to feel too deeply, but then you're there, and suddenly I'm wanting things I shouldn't. Imagining futures I have no right to dream about." "Like what?" "Like waking up next to you every morning. Like watching you interact with my people, and knowing you're mine." He'd cut himself off, shaking his head. "I'm scared too," I'd admitted. "Every day I expect you to realize I'm not enough." He'd pulled his horse to a stop. When I'd done the same, he dismounted and pulled me down beside him. The guards continued ahead, giving us space. "You bring me hope," he'd said fiercely, hands framing my face. "You bring me laughter and light, and the possibility that maybe I don't have to spend the rest of my life alone. Don't you understand? You're not a complication. You're the first thing in 8 years that's made sense." The confession broke something open inside me. I'd found myself crying, not from sadness, but from overwhelming relief of being seen. "I think I'm falling in love with you," I'd whispered. "I know it's too soon." "It's not too soon." His arms tightened. "It's been happening since that first moment when you looked at me without flinching." We'd stood there holding each other while night deepened, and I'd felt something click into place. Not the bond, not yet. But something just as powerful. A choice we were both making despite fear. "Whatever comes next," he'd said quietly, "I want you to know you've already changed everything." The attack. The bond snapped into place 3 days later. It happened in the most unexpected way. I'd been in the infirmary organizing supplies when shouting erupted from somewhere in the palace. Urgent. Panicked. Rowan burst through the door, face pale beneath scars. "It's the king," he'd gasped. "The rogues. They were a distraction. There's been an attack." I hadn't waited to hear the rest. My feet carried me through corridors I'd learned by heart. The throne room doors were thrown open, and inside Kieran was on his knees, surrounded by guards, blood soaking through his shirt. Not mortal, I'd realized with a healer's assessment, but serious. A blade had caught him across the ribs, deep and vicious. 3 dead rogues sprawled across marble. But it was his eyes that stopped me. He'd looked up as I entered, and in that moment of vulnerability, King brought low, defenses shattered, something ignited between us. The bond crashed over me like a tidal wave. Every nerve ending suddenly alive with the knowledge of him. I'd felt his pain as if it were my own. felt exhaustion dragging at his consciousness, felt desperate relief flooding through him at the sight of me. And underneath it all, a connection so profound it drove me to my knees beside him. "Mate," my wolf whispered with absolute certainty. "Ours." "Elena," he breathed, and I heard the same recognition in his voice. "Let me help," I'd managed, though my hands were shaking. The bond thrummed between us, demanding I touch him, heal him, make the pain stop. I'd pressed my hands against the wound, feeling warmth of his blood, the rapid beat of his heart. Palace healers arrived, pushing through the crowd. But Kieran caught my wrist. "No. Her. I want her." So I'd worked, drawing on every lesson my father had taught me. The wound had been clean. I'd stitched it closed with steady hands while the bond sang between us. "You feel it," he'd said when I'd finally finished. "Yes," I'd met his eyes. "I feel everything." The throne room emptied at Rowan's barked command. Kieran pulled me into his lap despite his injury. 8 years, he'd whispered against my hair. "I waited 8 years believing I'd never feel this again." "You're not unworthy," I'd said fiercely. "You were just waiting for me." His arms tightened. "I was waiting for you, and I didn't even know it." The council had no choice but to accept it. The bond ceremony was planned with speed that left them scrambling. "I've waited 8 years, Kieran told them flatly. "I won't wait longer than necessary." Natalia came to the palace. For the ceremony? Not from affection, but because refusing would have been disastrous. She'd looked at me with barely concealed envy. "I don't understand how you did it," she'd hissed during a moment alone. "You're nothing special, Elena." "You're right," I'd said quietly. "I'm not special in the ways you value, but I'm exactly what he needed." The ceremony was held in the palace gardens under a full moon. Traditional, but intimate. When time came to recite vows, Kieran's voice had been steady. "I, Kieran Blackwater, claim you, Elena Winters, as my mate, my equal, my queen. I vow to protect you with my life, to honor you with my truth, to love you with everything I am. From this moment until my last breath, you are mine, as I am yours." My own vows came through tears. "I, Elena Winters, accept your claim and offer my own. I choose you, Kieran Blackwater, not for your crown or power, but for the wolf beneath it all. From this moment until my last breath, you are mine, as I am yours." The bond solidified as we sealed vows with a kiss. I'd felt it, the snap of completion. The sense of two souls recognizing they'd finally found home. Every wolf present felt it too. The whispered acknowledgement that this was real. That night, in chambers that were now ours, Kieran held me close. "I used to dream about her," he'd said, fingers tracing patterns on my shoulder. "But since you've been here, I don't dream about her anymore. I dream about you, about our future." "Does that make you feel guilty?" "It did at first," he'd admitted. "But then I realized she would have wanted this. Would have wanted me to be happy again. And loving you doesn't diminish what we had." I'd turned in his arms. "I'll spend every day proving I'm worth that choice." "You already have," he'd replied. "Just by being exactly who you are." Epilogue. 1 year later. The months that followed brought challenges. Rogues had to be dealt with decisively, but now when Kieran left for patrols, I felt him through the bond. His determination, occasional frustration, the warm pulse of love sent back across distance. I'd taken on responsibilities as queen that surprised everyone. The Northern Pack's request for a healer had been first. Garrett asked specifically for my guidance. I'd spent 2 weeks there teaching everything I knew. When I'd returned, 3 other packs had made similar requests. "You're creating a network," Lydia had observed one afternoon, her son River sleeping nearby. "Healers across all territories, knowledge being shared." "Is that allowed?" I'd asked uncertainly. "It's brilliant," she'd interrupted firmly. "You're not just the king's mate, Elena. You're becoming a queen in your own right." The council came around eventually. Marcus had been first to acknowledge my influence had strengthened rather than weakened Kieran's rule. "The packs trust you," he'd admitted grudgingly. "They see you working with their healers, treating their children." Even Natalia eventually wrote a stiff letter asking if there might be opportunities for Thornwood wolves to train with palace healers. I'd written back with an invitation. Not because I'd forgotten her cruelty, but because I'd learned strength sometimes meant being bigger than the wounds others inflicted. A year after the bond formed, Kieran found me in the library, reading through reports from various healing stations I'd helped establish. "Come with me," he'd said, offering his hand. "I want to show you something." He'd led me to the northern woods, to the stream where we'd stopped on that first trip together. The sun was setting, painting the sky gold and crimson. "Do you remember what you asked me here?" he'd said, pulling me close. "About whether I ever just ran for joy?" "I remember." "I want to run with you," he'd whispered. "Not as king and queen. Just us. Just two wolves who found each other against all odds." We'd shifted together. His wolf was massive and dark. Mine was still small and silver-furred with two large eyes. But as we'd run through those woods together, his dark form matching pace with my lighter one, both finally free, I'd understood what I'd been too blind to see before. My supposed weakness had been my greatest strength all along. The gentleness others mistook for fragility had been exactly what was needed to reach a king who'd forgotten how to be touched without flinching. The compassion my pack dismissed had become the foundation of healing across 3 territories. The patience that seemed like passivity had been what allowed me to wait for a love worth having. We'd run until the moon rose full and bright, until we were both breathless and laughing, until we'd collapsed in a clearing and shifted back, tangled in each other's arms. "I love you,"